Hello, everybody, and today, for the movie review of this week, we are doing the movie Imaginary. So, I'm going to be very quick with this review, but we can have a little fun with it. So, I was actually kind of looking forward to this movie when I saw the trailer. I saw a teddy bear a lot in the trailer, and it reminded me a lot of Ted. And Ted has nothing to do with this movie at all. But this movie's made by Blumhouse, and they have made a lot of great horror movies lately. But they decided to do a sort of paranormal movie. It's about a little girl who has a new stepmom, and they decide to go to a new home to live in, and it turns out to be the stepmom's old childhood home. But when the little girl starts talking to her imaginary friend, it becomes sinister. So this movie was really boring in my opinion. When I originally saw it, I was like, what is going on? Because the characters are not really that interesting in my opinion, because they mainly just it just feels like a movie that's just kind of just there. Like it's kind of just a movie that's something we've kind of already seen, and the characters have various tropes that it kind of just becomes predictable throughout this whole movie. But they tried to make the characters somewhat interesting, because our main character named Jessica, the stepmom, she mainly has problematic relationships with her dad, because he's in a assisted living place and he apparently has like psychic episodes or something. But as this is going on, our fellow character, her main career is an artist, and because of that, her childhood was having an imaginary friend, and so she likes to draw out her imaginary friends while also pursuing her career. But her husband, who for some reason leaves during the movie, and he never comes back because he goes on some business trip, because he's also a musician. So these two have talents that are somewhat relatable, but you kind of just don't care because the characters are just so boring. And they also have a teenage daughter who I guess has a boyfriend in this movie, and she's kind of she kind of comes off as the typical teen. Like, she backtalks her stepmom a lot, and she kind of just is an asshole throughout the whole movie. But she is super nice to the little girl, of course. But as this is going on, this movie kind of reminded me of a story you'd hear in Mr. Nightmare. So if you watch some of his videos, there are actual real life horror stories, at least I think, that are of couples whose children are having imaginary friends, but they start to act a little out of the matrix, basically, and they basically gotta get therapy because of it. Those kind of stories is what reminded me of this movie. It's basically like a movie version of it. But throughout this whole movie, there's also this old lady who's been spying on them, who's also from the Split movies. I thought she was great in Split. But what is she randomly doing in Imaginary? She mainly has been living in this neighborhood for a long time and is apparently the babysitter who was babysitting our main character when she was a little girl. But the reason why she does live here is because she apparently is very interested in the whole imaginary world, and she has to stare at the house as the teenage girl literally just takes a selfie. I know these characters have names. Let's look at them. Okay, so the main guy, Max, he leaves the movie. We got Taylor, who's the teenage girl, Gloria, who's the old lady. We got Alice, who's the little girl, and Jess, okay, who's the main lady in this movie. But throughout this movie, our little girl is attached to a teddy bear, which reminds me of Ted, and she mainly is talking to it and getting upset whenever things go wrong with this imaginary friend. They even call like a psychiatric person or like a lady who's into the supernatural, and she mainly tries to talk things out with the little girl and through a session and a video camera, but it just doesn't work out. But the boyfriend, we also get this weird scene with the boyfriend who ends up going to the bathroom, but because something paranormal goes on, he ends up peeing himself, and it gets him pissed off. But it's just a lot of random stuff in this movie. But mainly, the main thing is the imagination. So this movie what could have been really good is like they could have maybe explored the imagination world really well, but the way they do it, it could have been way better executed, in my opinion, because it just felt so boring to watch. Because literally, the one main thing is like they had to do some spirit ritual after the little girl, I think, gets captured in the imagination world, and they basically suggest that you can do anything in the imagination world, and our Jessica and the old lady and Taylor end up doing a ritual to find a way to the imagination world, and they literally go through a tunnel to find it. But apparently they have like psychic visions or something, because apparently they deal with some kind of trauma, like her relationship with her dad. Taylor has visions of her actual mother, her biological mom, who did show up randomly in the movie, who broke into the house. But apparently it just isn't enough, and a lot of psychic things typically happen in this movie. But the old lady actually dies in this movie by she goes crazy after finding out that you could do anything in this imagination world, but she gets captured by a giant beast who is the main bad guy in this movie, who's apparently talking to the little girl, and he just looks like a giant hyena, like a crafted together wolf. Like, it looks almost practical, like something you'd see, I don't know, back in the early 90s movies of like Jim Henson. It's a weird comparison, I know, but like, this thing is mainly just so powerful that they have to run away from their worries, and they apparently have to fight through them. But they do find the little girl, and apparently she's like the queen in her own imagination world. But they end up escaping through the tunnel, and our main Jessica ends up sort of sacrificing herself to save the other two. But it turns out they end up waking up at the hospital, but it turns out it's all in their head. It's all a trick. It kind of reminded me a bit of Smile, like in that movie, where if like you think you're talking to somebody, but it turns out it's the smile curse. I think you know what I'm talking about. That movie's way better than this, but yeah, our main characters end up fighting and burning the house down when they finally escape the imagination world. And that's kind of the movie. It even ends with them seeing another teddy bear, but it turns out it's just some kid playing with it. But, so yeah, that's Imaginationary. It was a pretty disappointing movie. Just a lot of boring characters, kind of a typical story. It could have had potential to be a fun horror movie, but they could have just explored that imagination world a lot more than just having some creepy scenes that happen. And there was one jump scare scene that got me, but overall that wasn't enough for a good movie, in my opinion. I'd give Imaginary probably a 5 out of 10. I probably won't watch this movie again, since this movie was hard to watch, since it was boring. But people said this was probably one of the worst horror movies that came out this year. But if you enjoyed this movie, that's great. If you didn't, then that's also fine. But overall, for me, I could not get into this movie. And it feels bad, since I was actually excited for this movie. And I know how hard it is to make fun horror movies. But hopefully we can find something better. But the next movie, it was going to be Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 2. But I'm saving that for later. I want to review them all chronologically. So our next review is Self-Reliance, starring Jake Johnson. So that should be fun. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.